The surrender should have arrived 9 minutes ago. Reckoner Vesson watched the empty channel and felt, for the first time in his long service, the small cold pressure of a number that would not resolve. He had run the yielding curve on the human convoy the moment it entered the Wedden Deep, and the curve had returned the cleanest figure of his career. 14 freighters, 9 escorts. Against them, the Cephalon Compact had brought 410 hulls arranged in the closing crescent that every cataloged species in 6,000 years had answered the same way. They stopped their engines. They cut their weapons. They opened a channel and begged. 9 minutes, the humans had not begged. Confirm the broadcast reached them, Vesson said. It reached them, Reckoner. The signal's adept did not look up from her station. They received it in full. They have not acknowledged. Vesson turned back to the great curved display that wrapped the forward third of the flagship's reckoning deck, and he studied the human formation the way a physician studies a growth that the textbooks say cannot exist. 14 fat merchant hulls, running dark, their drives banked low to hide in the ionized murk of the deep. 9 escorts spread around them in a loose gray shell, undersized, underarmed, the largest of them a fraction of a single compact line cruiser. The ledger of yielding put a species like this at the 91st percentile of compliance. Show them the crescent, show them the ratio, and they fold. They always fold. Reckoner, the signal's adept said, the human formation is not slowing. They are increasing speed toward the far shoal. That was the first thing that was wrong, and Vesson marked it. A yielding species slowed. A yielding species turned its bright side toward the enemy so the enemy could see it was unarmed and afraid. These hulls were doing the opposite. They were burying themselves deeper into the murk, and they were running. He keyed his private log with 2 fingers, the old habit, and spoke very quietly so that the note would carry only to himself. Subject population declines the initial yielding prompt. Anomalous. Rerunning. He reran it. The curve came back the same, 91st percentile. He ran it a third time with the escort losses front-loaded, with the freighters weighted as protected mass, with every pessimistic hand on the scale he could think to add. And still, the answer said the humans should have their engines cold and their channels open and their throats bare. The mathematics of surrender were the oldest and surest science the compact owned. Vesson had spent 40 years inside them. He had never once seen the world disagree with the number. High Marshal Corvith came onto the reckoning deck without ceremony, as he did everything, and the deck officers straightened at their posts. He was old, Corvith, older than any officer had a right to be in a fighting fleet, his crest gone pale and his lower arms scarred to the bone from a century of boarding actions. The modern compact no longer fought. He stopped behind Vesson's station and looked at the display and said nothing for a moment. They have not yielded, Corvith said. It was not a question. No, High Marshal. Your curve said they would yield inside 4 minutes. Inside 4 minutes at 91% confidence, Vesson said. It is now past 10. Corvith made a low sound in his throat, neither anger nor worry, only the noise of an old predator reading weather. Then they are stupid, or they are frightened past sense, or they know something we do not. Which does your science say? Vesson did not have an answer his science would let him give. He said, My science says they should have yielded, High Marshal. It does not yet say why they haven't. Then we teach them the cost of the lesson, Corvith said, and turned to the deck. Advance the crescent. Take the outer freighters first. Leave the escorts their choice. They may run or they may burn. Either way the convoy dies in the deep, and the next human convoy that sees our crescent will remember what this one bought with its silence. The order went out across 410 hulls, and Vesson watched the crescent begin to close, and he told himself that the curve was not wrong. The curve was never wrong. It had only, for the first time in his life, been asked a question it did not yet understand. The first exchange came 11 seconds later, and it did not go the way the crescent expected either. The outermost compact skirmishers went in fast and loose, expecting to herd, expecting the fat freighters to scatter and the gray escorts to peel away and die one at a time in the murk. Instead, the gray shell contracted. The 9 escorts came together into a tight running wedge with the freighters packed inside it, and they did not scatter and they did not slow, and when the lead skirmisher squadron crossed into their envelope, the wedge lit up along its whole leading edge at once. "Return fire," the tactics adept reported, and there was surprise in his flat voice, which was itself a thing Vesson had rarely heard on this deck. "Coordinated, all 9 hulls firing on a single solution. They are Reckoner." They concentrated everything on the lead squadron. On the display, the lead compact squadron of 30 skirmishers went from 30 to 22 in the space of a breath. Not damaged. Gone. The human escorts had thrown every gun they owned at a single point in space and simply deleted the ships that were standing in it. "They cannot sustain that," the tactics adept added quickly, recovering. 9 hulls. They have spent their whole broadside on one squadron, the reload alone. "They are not trying to sustain it," Vesson said, and understood it as he said it. He keyed his log. "Subject escorts fight to price, not to win. They are making the crossing expensive." He watched the wedge drive on into the murk while the crescent adjusted around the sudden hole in its own leading edge, and he felt the cold pressure of the unresolved number tighten by a degree. A yielding species did not make you pay for the privilege of killing it. A yielding species yielded. "They will still die," the tactics adept said. "Yes," Vesson agreed. "They will still die." He did not say the rest of what he was thinking, which was that in 40 years he had built his reputation on knowing what a population would do before it did it, and that he had now been wrong twice inside a quarter of an hour, and that both times the world had corrected him in the direction of teeth. Corvith had watched the exchange without moving. Now he said, "Marshal Vesson, you disapprove of the order." "I do not disapprove, High Marshal. I observe that the population is not behaving as catalogued. That concerns me more than any one squadron." "It is 9 ships against 410, Corvith said. "Let it concern you after we have won. Close the crescent. Pin the freighters against the far shoal and be done." The crescent closed. It took 18 minutes, and they were the most expensive 18 minutes the compact fleet had spent in a generation, and no one on the reckoning deck said so aloud, but every officer on it knew it by the end. The 9 gray escorts did not break. They ran the convoy along the inner edge of the Wedden Shoal where the murk was thickest, and they turned and bled the crescent's leading squadrons every time the compact tried to pinch the freighters loose. And they died. 3 of them died, torn open and left drifting in dark. But they died slowly, and they took 11 times their number down into the murk with them. By the time the crescent had the 6 surviving escorts and the 14 freighters pinned against the far shoal with nowhere left to run, the compact had lost 61 hulls to a force it had expected to accept surrender without a single shot. 61. Vesson held the figure in front of himself and did not look away from it. It was not a large number against 410. It was a catastrophic number against 0, which was the number his curve had promised, which was the number a yielding species always cost. "They are pinned," the tactics adept reported. 6 escorts, 14 freighters, backs to the shoal, no exit vector. "High Marshal, they cannot run and they cannot break. This is the surrender point. If they were ever going to yield, it is now." "Reckoner," Corvith said, "rerun your curve. Give me the number here at the wall with no way out." Vesson ran it. The pinned population, the exhausted escorts, the helpless freighters, the shoal at their backs and 400 guns at their throats. Every input said the same thing his 40 years said. Cornered prey yields. The curve returned 98%. He almost let himself believe it. 98%, High Marshal, he said. At the wall, with the losses they have already taken, the population yields at 98% confidence. This time the number is nearly certain. "Open the channel," Corvith said. Give them the terms. Cold engines, open holds, and I will let the crews live. That is more mercy than 61 dead hulls have earned from me. The signals adept opened the channel and sent the terms, and the reckoning deck went quiet, and 410 hulls waited at the wall for the 14 freighters and the 6 gray escorts to do the only sane thing left in the mathematics of their situation. The humans answered this time. The voice that came back across the channel was young. That was the thing Vesson noticed first, before the words, before the translation caught up. The voice was young, and it was steady, and it carried none of the exhausted terror that a pinned population surrender voice was supposed to carry. He had heard 1,100 surrenders in his career. He knew the sound of a throat about to bare itself. This was not that sound. "Compact fleet," the young human voice said. "This is escort command aboard the Gray Squadron. We have received your terms. We are declining them." The tactics adept made a small sound. Corvith did not move. "You should know," the young voice went on, unhurried, "that we sent a wideband distress out of the deep the moment your crescent formed. That was 51 minutes ago. We have been running you in a circle inside this shoal since then, and we have been bleeding you, and we have been buying time, and you have been letting us because you thought you were closing a trap." A pause. "The trap closed 40 minutes ago. It just wasn't ours you were standing in." Vesson's lower hands had gone still on his console. He keyed his log and found he had nothing to write. "There is a ship coming," the young human said. "It has been coming since your first squadron died. I would tell you to run, but you have 400 hulls in a shoal with one exit, and it is already in that exit, and there is not enough room in the Wedden Deep for 400 ships to turn around before it arrives." Another pause, shorter. "You wanted our surrender. I'm giving you our answer instead. Look at your far picket. Look at the mouth of the deep. And understand that you brought 410 ships to a place my people already owned." The channel closed. For a moment no one on the reckoning deck spoke. Then the picket officer, at the rear of the deck at the station that watched the fleet's own back, said in a voice that had lost all of its color, "High Marshal, contact at the mouth of the deep." "Size," Corvith said. The picket officer did not answer at once. When he did, his voice did a thing Vesson had never heard a compact officer's voice do on a fighting deck. It cracked. "Sir," he said, "I don't. The return is wrong. The mass return is wrong. I've rechecked it 4 times. It's telling me the contact is 38 kilometers long." The reckoning deck was silent. "That's not a ship," the tactics adept said. "Nothing is 38 kilometers long. The largest hull in the compact archive is 3.1. Recheck the return." "I've rechecked it 4 times," the picket officer said. "The return does not change. 38 kilometers, and it is under power, and it is coming down the throat of the shoal at us, and it has not answered any hail because it is not slowing down to talk." Vesson turned in his seat and looked at the rear display, at the picket feed, at the mouth of the Wedden Deep, where the murk was thinning around a shape that his instruments insisted was too large to be a made thing. He had spent 40 years teaching himself to see a population before it acted. He had spent 40 years trusting the number over the eye. And now the number and the eye were saying the same impossible thing at once, and the young human's voice was still in the air of the deck, unhurried, certain, and Vesson understood. A whole minute before High Marshal Corvith gave the order to bring the fleet about, that the surrender had never been coming, because the humans had never been the ones cornered. They had been the bait. "Bring the fleet about," Corvith said. It was the correct order, and it came too late, and every officer on the deck knew both of those things at the same instant. 410 hulls do not turn in a shoal. They had spent the last hour packing themselves into the narrow ionized channels of the Wedden Deep to close their crescent around 14 freighters, and the geometry that had trapped the humans now belonged to the compact. The lead squadrons were 300 kilometers deep into the murk, with the shoal walls close on either side. To bring the fleet about meant to turn each squadron in place, in sequence, in a space barely wide enough to do it, while the thing at the mouth of the deep came down the throat toward them at a closing speed. The picket officer read off in a voice that kept trying to leave him. "It is not slowing," the picket officer said. "It has not slowed since it entered the shoal. High Marshal, at present closure, it reaches the rear squadrons in 19 minutes. Then the rear squadrons will meet it," Corvith said. "Reform the rear line, all heavy hulls to the mouth. If it wants the deep, it comes through our guns to have it." Vesson watched the rear of the fleet begin to reorder itself, the heavy line cruisers sliding back through the murk to build a wall across the throat of the shoal, and he ran a new curve without being asked, because it was the only thing he knew how to do with his hands. He fed it the contact. He fed it 38 kilometers, and he fed it a single hull, one ship against the 449 that remained, and the curve did something it had never done in 40 years of service. It returned nothing, not a low number, not a warning. It returned an error because the model had no category for a single hull that size, and a science built entirely on precedent has no answer for a thing that has never happened before. "Reckoner," Corvith said without turning, "your number." "I do not have one, High Marshal." Vesson heard his own voice from a distance. "The model cannot resolve the contact. It has no precedent to reason from. There has never been a warship of that displacement. There has never been a warship a tenth of that displacement." He paused. "I can tell you what 400 hulls do against ordinary odds. I cannot tell you what they do against a thing the ledger has no page for." "Then tell me what you see," Corvith said. "Use your eyes, Reckoner. That is also a science." Vesson used his eyes. The murk at the mouth of the deep had thinned enough now that the flagship's forward optics could hold the shape, and the reckoning deck's great curved display filled with it. And one by one, the officers stopped their work to look. Because there is a thing the body does when it sees a predator that is simply too large, and the body does it whether or not the mind gives permission. The shape came out of the ionized haze prow first, and the prow alone was larger than the flagship, larger than any line cruiser in the fleet. A blunt weathered wedge of gray armor scored and pitted and streaked with the discoloration of 100 crossings. And behind the prow the hull went back, and back and back, past the point where a ship should end, past the point where anything should end. 38 kilometers of layered plate and gun housing and engine glow, marching down the throat of the shoal like a coastline that had decided to move. It was not beautiful. That was the detail Vesson's mind fixed on, because his mind needed something small to hold. The compact built its warships beautiful, swept and bright and symmetrical, the visible argument that a superior people made superior things. This human ship was ugly. It was armored in slabs that did not match, gray over darker gray, whole sections of plating clearly newer than the rest, welded and bolted and grown over the scars of old wounds. Its flanks were studded with gun housings in numbers Vesson's optics gave up trying to count. Along its 38 kilometers of hull, 10,000 small lights burned, window glow, engine port glow, the warm and cold points of a thing that was crude and powered and awake in every meter of its impossible length. It did not pose. It did not broadcast. It came down the throat of the leaden deep at unbroken speed, and it did not slow to talk, because it had not come to talk. "What are its guns?" Corvith said quietly. "Working," the tactics adept said. His hands were moving fast now. "It has not fired. It has not raised shields that we can detect. It is not High Marshal. It is not doing anything. It is only coming." "That is the most frightened thing I have ever seen a machine do," Corvith said, and no one laughed. And Vesson understood that the old marshal had meant it not as fear but as reading, the flat professional reading of a hunter who had finally met the thing at the top of the list. A creature that must threaten is a creature that is not yet certain of the kill. This ship threatened nothing. It only came. "Rear line is formed," the line officer reported. 90 heavy hulls across the throat, firing solutions locked on the contact, awaiting the word. Corvith gave the word. 90 heavy line cruisers of the Sethlin compact fired at once into the mouth of the Wedden Deep, and for a moment the murk went white, and the reckoning deck's display bloomed and dimmed to hold the glare, and Vesson allowed himself, in that single moment, the thing his whole science had trained him to distrust, which was hope. 90 heavy hulls, the full weight of a compact battle line, every gun ranged and true, thrown into a single hull at optimal range. Nothing in the archives survived that. Nothing had ever needed to. The glare faded, the display cleared, the ship came on. "Report," Corvith said. The tactics adept did not answer immediately, and when he did his voice had the careful flatness of a man reading a result he did not want to be the one to say. "Impacts confirmed across the forward third of the contact. All 90 solutions struck true." A pause. No change in the contact's velocity, no change in its heading. No detectable damage to the hull beyond surface scoring. High Marshal, it scorched the paint. "That is not possible," the line officer said. "I am reading the return," the tactics adept said. "The return says we scorched the paint." Vesson looked at the ship. Where the 90-gun broadside had struck, along the forward third of that gray weathered flank, there was a broad smear of fresh black scoring across the armor, bright and raw against the older weathering, and it was already sliding past and away as the ship came on, and Vesson realized that he was looking at the newest wound on a hull that carried 100 years of them, and that this newest wound looked exactly like all the others, and that this was the point. This ship had been shot before. This ship had been shot by everything the galaxy owned, over and over, across a century of crossings. And it wore the scoring the way a coastline wears the sea, and it had never once been the thing that broke. He keyed his log. His hand was not entirely steady. "Full compact battle line broadside," he wrote. 90 heavy hulls. Result, cosmetic. He looked at the words and did not know what to do with them, because there was no percentile for cosmetic, no yielding curve that resolved a broadside into a scuff mark. "Reload and fire again," Corvith said. "Every hull, do not stop firing." They reloaded and they fired again, and this time the ship answered. It did not answer the way a compact warship answered, with the bright coordinated bloom of a battle line finding its solution. It answered the way weather answers. Somewhere along its 38 kilometers of flank, a bank of gun housings that Vesson's optics had counted among the 10,000 small lights simply opened, and the space between the ship and the compact rear line filled with a lattice of fire so dense and so fast that the display could not render it as individual rounds, and rendered it instead as a solid moving wall of light, and the wall crossed the gap in something under a second. And where the 90 heavy hulls of the compact rear line had been holding the throat of the shoal, there were 40. "Rear line," the line officer began and stopped, because there was nothing to add to the number. 40. In one answering salvo, the human ship had taken 50 of the compact's heaviest hulls out of the battle, and it had done it with a single bank of guns along a single section of a single flank, and it had not slowed, and it had not turned, and every other gun bank along its 38 kilometers was still closed, still waiting, still holding its fire the way a thing that owns the outcome does not need to spend everything at once. "It used one battery," Vesson said. He heard the wonder in his own voice and could not stop it. "High Marshal, it killed 50 heavy hulls with one battery. It has, I cannot count how many it has. The housings run the whole length of the flank, and this is one flank, and it has two." Corvith stood very still at the center of his reckoning deck, an old scarred predator watching the top of the list demonstrate exactly why it was at the top, and when he spoke his voice had none of the panic that had begun to leak into the younger officers' reports. It had something else. It had the recognition, professional and total, of a hunter who has finally been shown the animal that hunts hunters. "All hulls," Corvith said, "cease trying to hold the throat, disperse into the shoal, break line of fire, use the murk and the walls, make it hunt us one at a time instead of firing into a line." He turned to Vesson. "It is one ship, Reckoner, One hull, however, large. It cannot be everywhere in the deep at once. We are 440. If we scatter, most of us live. It was good doctrine. It was the correct order for a fleet cornered by a superior single hull. Refuse the mass target, dissolve into the terrain, force the predator to chase individual prey through cover where numbers and knowledge of the ground told for something. Vesson, who had spent his life converting doctrine into numbers, ran the scatter in his head and found that it gave the fleet its first non-zero survival figure since the ship had entered the shoal, and he opened his mouth to say so. Then the human captain spoke, for the first time, and the number changed. The voice came across every compact channel at once, unhurried, older than the escort commanders had been but not old, a young man's voice with the flat calm of someone who has done a hard thing so many times that it has stopped costing him anything to do it again. Compact fleet, this is the Perjurance. The reckoning deck heard the name in its own translation and then, a half-beat later in the original human sound, and Vesson marked that the human ship carried a name and not a number, and that the name meant, in the fragments of human speech the compact had catalogued, something close to the quality of enduring of a thing that outlasts the force applied to it. He keyed it into his log. It felt, absurdly, important to have it written down. "You are trying to scatter into the shoal," the Perjurance said. "I want to save you the effort of finding out how that ends, so I am going to tell you. I have been doing this a long time. I have chased fleets into shoals before. The murk you are hiding in does not hide you from me, because I do not need to see you to reach you, and the walls you are putting between us are not walls to a ship my size. You have one exit from the Wedden Deep, and I am standing in it. Every ship that turns for that exit comes toward me. Every ship that runs deeper into the shoal runs into a dead end I am walking toward at my leisure." A pause. "You may scatter. It changes the order in which this happens. It does not change whether it happens." "It is bluffing," the line officer said. "It cannot track 400 dispersed hulls through the murk. No sensor can." "It is not bluffing," Vesson said quietly, and did not know how he knew it, except that 40 years of reading populations had taught him the difference between a voice that threatens because it is afraid and a voice that informs because it is certain, and the Perjurance was not threatening. It was doing him the courtesy, the flat professional courtesy, of telling him the answer before he wasted lives arriving at it. "High Marshal, it is not bluffing. It is describing." Corvith looked at him for a long moment, and something passed between the old Marshal and the old Reckoner, the two of them the oldest minds on the deck, both of them trained on the same certainties, both of them watching those certainties come apart in real time. Then Corvith turned back to the display and gave the only order that a commander who does not yet believe can give. "Scatter," he said, "prove it wrong." They scattered, and the Perjurance proved it right. Vesson watched it happen across the great curved display, and he would spend the rest of his life unable to fully describe what he watched, because the human ship did not do the thing that 400 years of compact naval doctrine said a single hull must do against a dispersed fleet, which was to chase, to commit, to expose itself pursuing one target, and let the others slip its guns. The Perjurance did not chase. It came down the central channel of the Wedden Deep, at the same unbroken speed it had held since the mouth, 38 kilometers of gray, weathered hull filling the throat of the shoal, and it reached out. That was the only word Vesson's mind would give him for it. It reached out. As compact squadrons broke left and right into the side channels of the shoal, the Perjurance's gun banks opened along its flanks in sequence. Not all at once, never all at once, always a fraction of what it carried, and the fire went into the side channels after them, threading the murk, folding around the shoal walls in ways that compact fire could not, and the squadrons that had broken left died in the left channels, and the squadrons that had broken right died in the right channels. And the ship did not slow, and it did not turn, and it did not chase, because it did not need to chase a thing it could simply reach. 16th Squadron is gone, the tactics adept reported. 4th Squadron is gone. Ninth Reckoner, the Ninth Squadron ran into the deep shoal, into the dead water, exactly where it said they would, and he stopped. The Ninth Squadron is gone. Vesson was no longer running curves. There was nothing left to run. He was doing the older thing, the thing beneath the science, the thing his people had done before they had a ledger of yielding, which was to count. He counted the squadrons as they went dark on the display, and he found that he was counting them at very nearly the rate the perjurance was speaking, one flat, unhurried sentence per squadron, as though the human ship were reading the fleet's own order of battle back to it and striking each line as it went. The compact did not die without cleverness, and Vesson watched the cleverness fail too, which was somehow the worst of it. A squadron commander named Ilsit, a quick and careful officer whom Vesson had once assessed as the finest tactical mind in the fleet, understood before the others did that the human ship could not be broken by fire from the front, and reasoned that a thing that large must have a rhythm to its guns, a moment in the reload cycle of any one battery when that stretch of hull was blind. She gathered 11 surviving hulls in the murk of a side channel and held them silent while the perjurance passed, and she counted the pulses of the nearest gun bank, and she found the rhythm, and at the trough of it she loosed everything the 11 carried, not shells but the fleet's heaviest ordnance, the lances the compact reserved for cracking fortress moons, 40 of them at once into a single unshielded seam in the human hull. Vesson saw the lances strike. He saw them strike true, all 40, into the exact seam Ilsit had chosen, at the exact moment her counting had found, and for the length of a breath he believed she had done it, that the finest tactical mind in the fleet had found the one flaw in the impossible thing, and the reckoning deck drew in around the hope of it. The lances flowered against the seam in a line of white fire 2 kilometers long. When it faded, there was a scar. Only a scar deeper than the broadsides, a genuine wound in the outer plate, glowing at its edges, and beneath the outer plate there was another plate, and beneath that another, and the ship did not slow, and it did not yaw, and the gun bank whose rhythm Ilsit had so carefully counted resumed its pulse without a missed beat, because it had never been the only bank watching that channel. A second battery, further along the hull, opened on the source of the lances, and the 11 hulls of the finest tactical mind in the fleet became light. The perjurance did not even alter course to do it. It reached, the way it always reached, and Ilsit's cleverness joined the debris cooling against the shoal walls, and Vesson understood that the ship was armored not against a weapon, but against the whole idea of a weak point, that 100 years of being shot by everything the galaxy owned had taught its builders where every seam would be tested, and to lay 3 more plates behind it, and that there was no flaw to find because the ship was the accumulated answer to a century of people looking for one. She found the rhythm, the tactics adept said, quietly, almost to himself. She found the actual rhythm of its guns, and it did not matter because the hull behind the rhythm was still the hull. That is the lesson, adept, Vesson said. Everything we are clever enough to try, someone has already been clever enough to try against that hull, across 100 years. We are not fighting a ship. We are fighting everyone who ever fought it before us, all their cleverness folded into its plating. Ilsit did not fail. She did the finest thing a tactician could do. It is only that the finest thing a tactician could do was answered a century before she was born. Corvith tried the thing that Vesson had known he would try, because it was the thing a century of boarding actions had made into instinct, and because it was the last card a cornered fleet held. He turned back to the wall of the shoal where the human convoy was still pinned. 14 freighters and 6 gray escorts, backs to the far shoal, exactly where the Crescent had trapped them an hour and a lifetime ago, and he ordered the nearest surviving squadrons to close on them. The convoy is why it came, Corvith said. It came for its own. Then its own are the price we hold. Signal the human ship. Tell it that the moment it fires on another compact hull, we open on the freighters. 14 soft hulls. It will not spend its own to spite us. The order went out, and the signal went out, and Vesson watched the surviving compact squadrons wheel back toward the pinned convoy, and for the length of 3 breaths, He let himself believe that the old marshal had found the one lever that even the top of the list would have to respect, because it was the lever that had ended 100 sieges in the compact's long history. You do not destroy the thing that comes to rescue its people. You put your knife to its people's throats, and you make it choose. The Perjurans answered the signal, and the answer was not addressed to Corvith. "Gray Squadron," the human captain said, on the open channel, so that the whole compact fleet heard him give the order and understood that they were meant to hear it. "This is Perjurans. You are released from the convoy, turn and engage at will. I have the freighters." And the 6 gray escorts that had spent the last hour dying slowly to protect 14 soft hulls turned away from those hulls, all at once, and drove straight back into the compact squadrons that were closing on them. And behind them, along the far wall of the shoal, the 14 freighters that Corvith had just marked as hostages lit their drives and began to move, not away from the battle, but along the shoal wall toward the central channel, toward the Perjurans. And Vesson understood the third thing that his science had gotten wrong today. They were not freighters. "Mass returns from the convoy are changing," the tactics adept said, and there was a new register in his voice now, the register of a man who has stopped being surprised and started being afraid in a steady, professional, permanent way. "The 14 hulls we catalogued as merchant tonnage, High Marshal, they are shedding mass. They are shedding hull. They are—" He stopped. "They were shells. The merchant profile was a shell. Underneath they are warships," Vesson said. "They are warships." He keyed his log with hands that had stopped pretending to be steady. "Convoy was bait at 2 levels. The freighters are not freighters. Subject population laid this before we ever formed the crescent." He looked at the far wall of the shoal, where 14 lean gray warhulls were sloughing off their merchant disguises and lighting their guns, and he understood the full architecture of the thing the compact had walked into, and it was not a trap the humans had improvised when the crescent closed. It was a trap the humans had built and baited and waited inside, patiently, for the compact to fill. "They wanted us to catch the convoy," he said, aloud to no one, because it was too large a thing to keep behind his teeth. "The whole crescent. They let us corner them. They bled us for an hour and made us think we were winning so that we would commit the entire fleet into the deep and pack ourselves into the shoal where we could not turn. And then they called the Perjurans in behind us and closed the only door. High Marshal. We did not trap them. We accepted an invitation." Corvith said nothing for a moment. The old marshal's scarred lower arms had folded slowly against his chest, the posture of a hunter who has understood that he is, for the first time in a long life, the smaller animal in the encounter. When he spoke, it was not to the deck. It was to Vesson, quietly, the 2 old minds again. "You built your science on the certainty that the cornered thing yields," Corvith said. "I built mine on the certainty that the larger fleet wins. We are both tonight being taught the same lesson by the same teacher." He raised his voice to the deck. "Open a channel to the human ship, direct. I will speak to it myself." The channel opened. Vesson watched the old marshal draw himself up, and he heard him speak to the Perjurans in the formal cadence of the compact, the cadence that had accepted 900 surrenders across 6,000 years, and he heard the old certainty in it even now, because a mind does not shed the shape of its whole life in a single hour. "Human vessel," Corvith said. "I am High Marshal Corvith of the Sethlin Compact. You have made your point. You have a ship we cannot answer, and you have arranged this ground to your advantage, and you have cost me 200 hulls. I am prepared to withdraw what remains of my fleet from the Wedden Deep and end this engagement. You have won the field. Grant my ships the passage to leave it." There was a silence on the channel. When the Perjurans answered, the young human captain's voice had not changed at all, not warmer, not colder, only the same flat endurance it had carried since it first spoke, and that unchanging quality was, Vesson thought, the most frightening thing about it, because it was the voice of someone for whom this was neither triumph nor tragedy, but simply the work. "High Marshal," the Perjurans said, "I understand you think this is a battle you're losing, and that at some point the losing will get bad enough that I'll let you leave to stop it. I want to be honest with you because you're old and you've earned honesty. That isn't what this is." "Then tell me what it is," Corvith said. "Your compact has done this 900 times, the Perjurant said. "You find a smaller people, you show them the crescent. They surrender and you take what you came for and you fold them into your tables as another line that yields. You did it to the Arrow. You did it to the Mensuk. You did it to the shoal folk of the Calder Crossings, who were our friends, which is how we came to be in the Wedden Deep tonight." A pause. "You came here expecting the 901st surrender. You will not get it. Not because we are stronger than the 900, because we decided, a long time ago, that the Crescent gets exactly one answer from us, and the answer is not the one that goes in your table. We are the answer that ends the table. I'm not letting your fleet leave the deep, High Marshal, because the whole point of tonight is that everyone who was ever going to see your Crescent needs to hear what happened to the fleet that showed it to us. You are not a battle. You are a message." The channel closed, and High Marshal Corvith stood in the center of his reckoning deck for a long moment. And then he did the thing that Vessen would remember longest, because it was the thing that told him the old Marshal had finally, fully understood. Corvith stopped giving orders as a commander who expected to win. He began giving orders as a commander arranging how his fleet would die, so that it would die costing the enemy something, so that some fraction of it might slip past the enemy and carry word home. "We cannot break the ship," Corvith said, calm now, the calm on the far side of hope. "So we will not try to break the ship, we will try to pass it. All squadrons all at once, single vector straight down the central channel at the exit. Do not fire on it as you pass unless it fires on you. It is 38 kilometers of hull in a channel 100 kilometers wide. It cannot fill the whole channel. Some of us live through the gap on either side of it. Those who live carry the message home, not the message it wants sent but the true one. That the compact met a thing it could not answer, and that the Crescent is finished, and that we must never show it again." It was, Vessen thought, the finest order he had heard a marshal give in 40 years, and it was the order of a man who had accepted the shape of the night. The surviving compact fleet gathered itself out of the side channels of the shoal, 230 hulls, the wreckage of 410, and it formed into a single desperate column aimed straight down the central channel at the narrow, bright waters where the Perjurants held the exit, and it lit its engines, and it ran for the gap. Vessen watched the column form and ran the last curve he would run that night, because he could not stop himself, because the running of curves was the shape of his life, the way the Crescent was the shape of Corvith's. He fed it 230 hulls, single vector, maximum burn, 100-kilometer channel, and a 38-kilometer obstacle. The geometry gave a gap on either side of the human ship. The geometry said that if the Perjurants could only bring a fraction of its guns to bear on a fraction of the column at any instant, then the greater part of the column threaded the gaps and lived. The geometry, for the first time in an hour, returned a number that was not despair. It said 140 hulls reach the exit. It said the message goes home. The geometry was correct about everything except the ship. The Perjurants had held its fire in fractions all night. It had killed the rear line with one battery and the side channel squadrons with a handful more, and Vessen had counted, without letting himself finish the thought, how few of the 10,000 gun lights along that 38-kilometer hull had ever opened. Now the human captain's flat voice said one word on the open channel, not to the compact, Vessen realized, but to his own crew, left open so that the compact would hear it and understand what unhurried thing was about to happen to them. And the word was, in its human sound, simply, all of them. And the Perjurants opened every gun it had. The display could not hold it. 38 kilometers of hull, both flanks, 10,000 housings, every one of them firing at once into a single column of 230 ships packed into a 100-kilometer channel with nowhere to disperse. And the reckoning deck's optics whited out and stayed white, and the automatic filters cut in again and still could not bring the glare down to a level, the deck could look at. And for 11 full seconds, the Wedding Deep held more light than it had held since the star that made it died. Vesson did not look away. He owed the fleet that much. He thought the man whose science had told them all to expect a surrender, owed it to the 230 hulls to watch what his certainty had helped drive them into. When the light fell, the column was gone. Not scattered, not broken. Gone, in the way the 9th Squadron had been gone, the way the rear line had been gone. 230 hulls reduced in 11 seconds to an expanding field of glowing debris that drifted against the shoal walls and cooled slowly from white to orange to the sullen red of dying metal. The gap on either side of the perjurance, the gap the geometry had promised, had never mattered, because the ship had not needed the column to come to its guns. Its guns had reached the whole channel at once. The category error was not only that the ship was too large, it was that a ship that large, firing everything, did not leave a gap for geometry to find. 230, the tactics adept said, into a silence that had swallowed even the ordinary sounds of the deck. He did not add anything to it. There was nothing to add. Vesson looked at the number on his log, the fleet that had entered the Wedding Deep 410 strong, reduced now to the scattered handfuls that had not joined the final column, perhaps 30 hulls, perhaps fewer, hiding in the dead channels of the shoal where they would be found and reached at the human ship's leisure. And he understood that his science had been asking the wrong question all night. He had spent the hour trying to compute when the humans would yield. The correct question, the question the ledger had no column for, was whether there existed any force in the reach of the Cephalon compact that could make the humans need to. And the perjurance had spent the night answering it, patiently, one squadron at a time, and the answer was no. He did the thing then that a reckoner is never supposed to do, which was to go looking, in the middle of a battle, for the reason. He pulled the compact's full archive on human contact, the whole file, 6,000 years of cataloged species and the human's thin place among them, and he read it in the light of the burning column, and what he found there frightened him more than the ship had. The file was almost empty. The compact had met humanity 40 years ago at the edge of the Calder crossings, had catalogued them as a minor spacefaring people of no particular strength, had assigned them the 91st percentile of compliance on the basis of their small ships and their scattered colonies and their apparent lack of any large fleet, and had filed them and moved on. There was no entry for a warship of any size worth noting. There was no entry for the perjurance. There was no entry for a human capacity to build a thing 38 kilometers long, because in 40 years of watching, the compact had never once seen the humans build anything larger than a frigate, and had concluded, reasonably, by the only science it owned, that they could not. Vesson sat with that in the burning light, and the cold pressure that had ridden him all night finally resolved into a single clear and terrible understanding. The compact had not underestimated the human strength. It had never seen their strength at all. For 40 years the humans had shown the galaxy small ships and scattered colonies and a modest, unthreatening face, and the galaxy had catalogued that face and believed it, and all the while, somewhere the compact's scanners had never thought to look, they had been building this. Not in answer to the Crescent, before the Crescent. They had built a thing that made surrender impossible, and then they had waited patiently for 400 years of compact doctrine to walk into a shoal and find out. "Reckoner," Corvith's voice pulled him out of the archive. "You have found something. Your face has the look of a man who has read his own obituary." "I have found what we did not know," Vesson said. "High Marshal, our file on the humans is 40 years old and it is nearly empty. We rated them a minor people because we only ever saw minor ships. We never saw a warship, not one, in 40 years. He turned from his station. "This vessel is not new. Look at the weathering on its hull. Look at the scars. It has been fighting for a century. It was fighting before we ever catalogued the humans as harmless. They showed us small ships on purpose. They let us write them down as weak, and they kept this out of our sight the entire time." Corvith was quiet. Then he said, So the surrender we came for was never in the humans. It was in our own file. We surrendered to the number on the page 40 years ago, and we have spent tonight discovering that the page was a lie the humans let us write. Yes, High Marshal. That, Corvith said, is the most complete defeat I have ever heard described, and I have heard many. He turned back to the display, where the last coherent formations of the compact fleet were coming apart in the dead channels of the shoal. How many hulls do we have left that can still answer an order? The line officer answered, and his voice had gone hollow. 31, High Marshal, plus the flagship. 31 out of 410, in something less than 2 hours. Vesson wrote the numbers down because writing them down was the last piece of his science he still had, and because a part of him understood already that these numbers would outlive him, that they would be carried out of the Wedden Deep and spoken in compact war rooms for 100 years. 31 out of 410, the night the crescent broke. One of the 31 did not wait for the manner of its dying to be chosen for it. A heavy line cruiser under a squadron commander named Sethon Vor, Vesson knew the name, a proud and fervent officer of an old fighting family, broke from the dead channels at maximum burn and turned its prow straight at the perjurants, and its commander opened a channel and cried out across it, in the high cadence of a compact death oath, that the compact did not end tonight, that no beast however large stood against the will of a true people, and that he would open the human hull with his own, if his guns could not. Vesson watched Sethon Vor's cruiser cross the channel at ramming speed, 3,000 meters of compact steel and fury aimed at the flank of the human ship, and he did not look away from that either, because Vor was one of his own and deserved a witness. The cruiser struck the perjurants amidships at a closing speed that would have gutted any hull in the compact archive. The perjurants did not so much as yaw. The cruiser broke against its flank the way a wave breaks against a headland, folding, crumpling, its 3,000 meters of steel accordioning into a burst of debris and light against armor that had been scored by 90 heavy hulls an hour before and had not noticed that either. And when the debris cleared, there was a fresh smear of black on the gray flank, another wound among the century of wounds, and the ship came on, unchanged, unhurried. Exactly as fast as it had been before a proud man threw his life and his crew against it. On the open channel, there was only the small terrible silence where Sethon Vor's death oath had been. It did not even fire on him, the tactics adept said. It let him come. It did not consider him worth a gun. No, Vesson said, he found that his throat was tight. It considered him worth an example. It let the whole fleet watch what happens when we throw ourselves at it. That is worse than being shot. Being shot means you were a threat. He keyed his log a last time, though he no longer knew who would ever read it. Subject vessel declines to expend ordnance on a ramming heavy cruiser. Result of impact, cosmetic. Cosmetic. The word had become a kind of horror on the reckoning deck, spoken flatly now by officers who 2 hours ago had commanded the most feared fleet in this arm of the galaxy. 90-gun broadside, cosmetic. 3,000-meter ram at full burn, cosmetic. The perjurants wore everything the compact could do to it, the way a coastline wears the weather, and the weather does not defeat the coastline, and the coastline does not thank the weather for stopping, and there is no negotiation between them because there was never a contest. The gray escorts and the 14 unmasked warships that had once pretended to be freighters were among the dead channels now, methodical, unhurried in the way their great ship was unhurried, finding the scattered compact survivors where they hid and ending them one at a time. And Vesson realized that the humans fought the same at every scale. The escorts the same as the perjurants, patient, concentrated, never spending more than the moment required, never gloating, never hurrying. As though the whole species had decided a long time ago that battle was not a passion but a task, and that a task is done thoroughly and without heat. It was, he thought, the most alien thing he had encountered in 40 years of studying alien things, and he had spent those 40 years believing himself the alien in every room he entered. He had never met a people who frightened him by their calm. "High Marshal," the signal's adept said, "the human ship is hailing you, directly. It has stopped firing on the survivors to do it." Corvith straightened. "It has stopped firing." "Every gun. The whole fleet theirs has stood down. The escorts, the freighters, the perjurants. They have all ceased fire, High Marshal. And the perjurants is hailing your flagship, and only your flagship, and it is waiting." Vesson watched the old marshal cross to the command station and stand before the hailing channel, and he understood that the night had reached the thing it had been walking toward since the surrender that never came, and that whatever the perjurants meant to say now, it would be the thing the message was actually made of, and that everything before it, the 410, the crescent, the broadside, the ram, had only been the ink. Corvith opened the channel. "I am here, human ship," he said. "High Marshal Corvith," the perjurant said, "I am going to tell you how tonight ends, and then I am going to let you decide the one part of it that is still yours to decide." "Say it," Corvith said. "You have 31 hulls left that can move, and your flagship. That is your whole fleet. I can end all 32 in about 90 seconds, and if you make me hunt them through the dead channels I will, and it will not take me much longer than that." A pause. "I do not want to. Not because I would grieve them. Because a fleet that dies to the last hull sends no one home, and a message no one carries is not a message. So here is what I am going to do, and you are going to help me do it, because it is the only thing left that serves your people instead of my point." Vesson watched the old marshal's crest, and saw it flatten, the small involuntary tell of a compact male hearing a truth he cannot answer. "I am going to let your flagship leave the Wedden Deep," the perjurant said. "Intact, unfired upon. You, your command deck, your reckoner who has been running numbers at me all night and getting them wrong, all of you. You will carry what you saw here back to the compact yourselves in your own words with your own scars, and no one who hears you will be able to say you exaggerated, because you are the High Marshal and you do not exaggerate, and everyone in the compact knows it. That is why it is you I am sparing, not for mercy. Because you are the most credible witness your people own, and I need the credible witness to live." "And the 31, Corvith said. "That is the part that is still yours," the perjurant said. "I will spare 10 of them, and you will choose which 10, and they will form up on your flagship and leave with you. The other 21 I am going to destroy, in front of you, on your way out, so that, when you tell this story, you are not tempted to soften it, and so that the 10 you save spend the rest of their lives knowing they left the deep across the graves of the ones you didn't. I am not doing that to be cruel to you, High Marshal. I am doing it because your compact has folded 900 peoples into its tables by teaching them that the crescent means surrender, and the only thing that unteaches 900 years of that is a witness who cannot lie to himself about the price. Choose your 10. The reckoning deck was silent. Vesson looked at the old marshal and saw him do the arithmetic, not a reckoner's arithmetic, the other kind, the kind that has a name attached to every number, and he saw the cost of it land on the old scarred shoulders and stay there, and he understood that the perjurants had found the one weapon it had not yet used, which was to hand a proud man the responsibility for exactly how many of his own would live, and make him carry it out of the deep and into the rest of his life. "You are not a beast," Corvith said, very quietly into the channel. "No," the perjurant said. "I told you, I am a message. Choose your 10, High Marshal. My patience tonight is very long, but it is not the same thing as forever." Corvith chose his 10. Vesson did not watch him do it, and he did not listen to the names, because there are things a man is not meant to witness in another man even when they share a deck, and the choosing of 10 hulls to live from 31 was one of them. He looked instead at the great curved display, and at the 38-kilometer shape that held the exit of the Wedden Deep, patient, weathered, 10,000 small lights burning along its flanks, and he tried one last time to make his science say something true about it. He could not. The ledger of yielding had no page for a thing that spared you in order to defeat you more completely, that let you live specifically so that your living would carry its point further than your death ever could. His whole science had been built on the certainty that force sought surrender, that the purpose of overwhelming power was to make the other side yield and be folded in. The Perjurants did not want the compact to yield. It wanted the compact to remember. Those were not the same thing, and only one of them could be written in a table, and the humans had built a ship 38 kilometers long precisely so that they would never have to be written in anyone's. The 10 were chosen. They formed up on the flagship. 10 gray compact line cruisers gathered close around the wounded pride of a fleet that had entered the deep 410 strong, and the flagship's engines lit, and the column of 11 surviving hulls turned toward the exit of the Wedden Deep, toward the narrow, bright waters where the Perjurant stood aside, drifting its incomprehensible bulk a few kilometers off the central channel to leave the exit open. And Vesson felt the flagship begin to move beneath him, toward a freedom he had not expected to be granted, and did not know how to hold. The 21 that Corvith had not chosen followed the column at a distance, because they had nowhere else to go, because the dead channels held nothing but the dead, and they must have known, all 21 of them, what the drift toward the exit meant for them. And Vesson thought that the not knowing which of the 31U would be must have been its own particular cruelty, and that the humans had understood that too. Everything the Perjurants did, it did understanding the exact weight of it. That was the category error the compact had never seen coming, not the size of the ship, the size of the patience behind it. They were 4 kilometers from the exit when the Perjurants kept its word. It did not use a fraction of its guns for the 21. Vesson understood, watching, that this was deliberate too, that the Perjurants had killed the rear line with 1 battery and the final column with all of them, and that the choice of how much to spend was itself part of the message every time. For the 21, it opened perhaps 100 housings along one flank, a rounding error against the 10,000 it carried, and the fire crossed the 4 kilometers of open channel and found the 21 where they trailed the column, and it was over before the sound of it would have reached a living ear in atmosphere. 21 compact line cruisers, crude and awake and moving, became an expanding field of cooling debris drifting against the shoal walls, and the 11 survivors of the flagship's column flew on through the light of it toward the exit, and no one aboard the flagship said a word. And Vesson thought that the silence on the reckoning deck in that moment was the truest sound the compact had made all night. He looked at the debris field as it slid past the flagship's flank, and he made himself count it, because he was a reckoner and counting was the last office he had left, and because the 21 deserved to be counted by someone who understood exactly what number they had been subtracted from. 410 had entered the Wedden Deep. 11 were leaving it. He wrote the 2 numbers in his log one above the other and looked at the space between them, and there was no science in him that could bridge it, because the bridge was not made of anything his science measured. It was made of a decision the humans had made a long time ago, in some room the compact had never seen, about what the Crescent would cost the next fleet that flew it. The flagship crossed the exit of the Wedden Deep into open water, and the murk thinned and fell away behind it, and the 10 gray cruisers held their close formation, and the Perjurants let them go. It did not pursue. It did not fire a last shot. It simply held its position across the mouth of the deep, 38 kilometers of weathered gray hull with its 10,000 lights, and it grew smaller in the flagship's rear optics with the terrible slowness of a very large thing seen from very far, and it did not diminish in any way that mattered, because a thing that size does not need to chase you to remain the largest fact in your life. The human captain's voice came across the channel one final time, when the flagship was 100,000 kilometers clear and climbing, and it had not changed at all, and Vesson knew he would hear it in the quiet places of his mind for whatever years he had left. "High Marshal Corvith," the Perjurant said, "you will reach the compact in 11 days. When you do, they will not want to believe you, because what you are carrying home unmakes the thing they have believed for 6,000 years, and men do not surrender a belief that sighs without a fight. Make them believe you anyway. Tell them about the crescent. Tell them it got you nothing here but graves. Tell them there is a people at the edge of the Calder crossings who do not have a surrender point, who built a thing 38 kilometers long specifically so that they would never need one, and who will bring it to anyone who shows them the crescent again. A pause, and for the first time, very slightly, something almost like weariness moved under the flat calm of it, the weariness of a young man who has done a necessary thing many times and knows he will do it again. We did not want the Weddin deep. We wanted the Calder folk left alone, and you would not leave them alone, and so we taught you the one lesson your tables had no room for. Do not make us teach it twice. Go home, High Marshal, carry the message. That is why you are alive. The channel closed, and it did not open again, and the perjurants held the mouth of the Weddin deep behind them until the distance and the murk took it, and Vessen watched the place where it had been long after there was anything left to watch. They flew for 11 days. Vessen did not sleep for the first 2 of them. He sat at his station on the reckoning deck long after his watch had ended, and he pulled the ledger of yielding, the whole of it, 6,000 years of catalog surrenders, 900 peoples reduced to curves and thresholds and percentiles, and he read it the way a man reads a letter he wrote in a life he no longer believes in. It was, he saw now, a beautiful thing and a false one. Every entry in it was true. The Aral had yielded at the crescent. The Mensuk had yielded. The shoal folk of the Calder crossings had yielded, and there, in the margin of the Calder entry, in a reckoner's dry hand 40 years dead, was the note that the Calder folk had, at the moment of their yielding, spoken of allies they trusted from beyond the crossings, and that this claim had been assessed as the ordinary desperate bluff of a yielding people, and assigned no weight. Vessen read that margin note 4 times. The compact had heard the humans named, 40 years ago, in the mouth of a dying people, and had filed the naming under bluff, because the science had no column for an ally that would actually come. He understood then that his people had not been defeated by a ship. They had been defeated by the shape of their own certainty, which had a place for everything except the thing that was true. The ledger measured when a people would yield. It could not measure a people who had removed themselves from the question, who had looked at the whole logic of surrender, the crescent and the ratio and the folding in, and had built patiently, across a century their enemies never watched, the single physical fact that made the logic inapplicable to them. You cannot compute the surrender point of a people who have decided not to have one. The number does not fail to resolve because the model is wrong. It fails to resolve because the people have stepped outside the kind of thing the model is about. On the 3rd day, Corvith came and sat beside him at the reckoning station, which no High Marshal had ever done in Vessen's 4 decades of service, and the 2 old minds looked together at the ledger on the display, the beautiful false science that had ruled 6,000 years and had walked 400 hulls into a shoal. "You are trying to find where it broke," Corvith said. "It did not break, High Marshal. That is what frightens me. Every entry is still true. The Aral yielded. The Mensuk yielded. The ledger predicted all 900 correctly." Vessen gestured at the display. "It was never wrong. It was only incomplete, in the one way that could kill us. And there was no way inside the science to know which way it was incomplete, until the incompleteness arrived flying 38 kilometers long." Corvith was quiet for a while. Then he said, "When I was young, I flew the crescent against the Aral, 9 of us against 40 of them. They yielded in under an hour, and we folded them in, and I was decorated for it, and I believed for the whole of my life after that the crescent was the wisest thing the compact had ever built. A way to win without the cost of winning. A way to grow the compact by teaching the small the arithmetic of their own smallness." He turned his scarred face toward the display. "I flew at 410 hulls strong into the Weddin deep because I had flown it 100 times and it had never once failed me. And the humans knew that. The ship said it. You have done this 900 times. They did not beat a fleet, Vessen. They beat a habit. They found the oldest, surest habit the compact owned, and they built the exact thing that turns the habit into a grave, and then they let us walk into it out of the confidence the habit had given us. They will do it again, Vesson said. The captain said as much. To anyone who flies the crescent at the Calder crossings, or at any people the humans have decided to stand behind. Yes, Corvith rose slowly, the century in his joints. Which is why the message must land whole, and why it must land through me, exactly as the human intended, and why I am going to spend whatever is left of my life making certain the compact does not answer the Wedden Deep the way it will want to answer it. He looked down at Vesson. It will want to send a larger fleet. You know this. There will be voices in the High Hall who hear 410 dead and conclude only that 410 was too few. I need you to make them understand that there is no number, that the ship is not a quantity we came up short against, that it is a different kind of thing than quantity, and that quantity is precisely the mistake it was built to punish. They will not want to hear it from a reckoner whose science just failed. They will hear it from the reckoner whose science just failed, Corvith said, because he is the only one in the compact who can tell them exactly how it failed, and why a larger fleet fails the same way, only more expensively. Your ruined certainty is the most useful thing in the fleet now, Vesson. Do not waste it grieving. Spend it. They reached the compact on the 11th day, exactly as the perjurants had said they would, and the compact did not want to believe them, exactly as the perjurants had said it would not. Vesson stood in the high reckoning hall of the Sethlin compact, a chamber older than most of the peoples the compact had folded in, its walls inscribed with the 900 yieldings in a script so old that only reckoners could still read it, and he watched the assembled marshals and coadjutors and archons receive the news of the Wedden Deep. And he watched the thing happen that the human captain had predicted from 100,000 kilometers away with the flat certainty of a man who understood the compact better than the compact understood itself. They did not believe, or rather they believed the facts. 410 hulls entered, 11 returned. The numbers were the numbers and Corvith did not exaggerate, and they refused the meaning. A ship 38 kilometers long was impossible, and since it was impossible, the 11 survivors must have met something else, some weapon, some trick, some field of massed guns misread in the murk as a single hull. The mind that has believed one thing for 6,000 years does not surrender the belief to a survivor's testimony. It surrenders the survivor's testimony instead. You are telling us, said the first Archon, an old cold male named Osric whose family had inscribed the arrow yielding on the western wall 3 centuries before, that a minor people we catalogued at the 91st percentile of compliance destroyed 400 hulls of the line with one ship, and that we should therefore never again fly the crescent that has grown this compact for 6,000 years. You will forgive the hall if it finds the conclusion larger than the evidence. The evidence is the size of the conclusion, first Archon, Vesson said. That is precisely the difficulty. I ran the yielding curve on the humans myself in the deep as the crescent closed. It returned the 91st percentile. It was correct about the humans we had catalogued and wrong about the humans who existed, and the gap between those two is the entire reason 400 hulls are debris in a shoal. He gestured to the western wall, to the 900 yieldings. Every name on that wall is a people who had a surrender point. That is why they are on the wall. The crescent found the point and pressed it, and they yielded, and we wrote them down. The humans are not on that wall and never will be, because they do not have the thing the wall measures. They removed it. They looked at the crescent as an idea and built a physical object that makes the idea inapplicable to them. And then they hid the object from us for 40 years so that we would fly the crescent at them in full confidence and learn the lesson at full price. Then we build a larger crescent, said a marshal near the front, young and hard, a male named Tesk whose fleet had not been at the Wedden Deep and who therefore still owned his certainty whole. 400 was too few. We send 4,000. We send 40,000. No hull, whatever its size, Answers 40,000. And there it was, exactly as Corvith had said it would be, the voice that heard the graves and concluded only that there had not been enough of them. Vesson felt the whole weight of the night in the Wedden deep settle onto the answer he had to give, and he understood that this, and not the battle, was the thing the humans had actually sent him home to do. "Marshal Tesk," Vesson said, "I am a reckoner. I have spent 40 years converting force into the surrender it produces. So let me answer you in the only language the Crescent has ever spoken, which is arithmetic, because you are right that the hall should not be moved by a survivor's fear, and you are right to ask for the number. I will give you the number." He crossed to the hall's reckoning plinth, the ancient instrument at the center of the chamber where the great questions of the compact had been computed for 6,000 years, and he keyed into it the thing he had done every day of his career, and he did it now in front of the assembled power of the compact, so that they would see it fail with their own eyes. 40,000 hulls, he said, and entered them. "Against the human vessel, I am giving your fleet every advantage the record allows. I am assuming the ship carries no more guns than we counted at the Wedden Deep, though we counted only the guns it chose to open. I am assuming it cannot be everywhere, though it reached both walls of a shoal without moving. I am assuming its patience is finite, though it spared us specifically to prove that it is not. 40,000 hulls, every optimistic hand on the scale. Watch." The plinth computed and returned, and Vesson turned the result to the hall so that all of them could read it in the old script. "The model cannot resolve the engagement," he said. "It returns an error. The same error it returned in the Wedden Deep against one ship, and it returns it now against a fleet 100 times the size of the one we lost, for the same reason, which is that the ship is not a quantity. Marshal Tesk, the Crescent is a machine for finding a surrender point and pressing it. 40,000 hulls presses harder than 400. But you cannot press a point that does not exist, and pressing harder on a point that does not exist does not create one. It only puts 40,000 hulls where 400 were, in front of a ship that answers all of them the same way it answered ours, patiently, completely, and without ever needing to hurry. You would not be sending a larger fleet against the perjurants. You would be sending a larger message to the same funeral, and paying for it with the whole of the compact's line instead of one fleet's." The hall was silent. It was, Vesson thought, the same silence that had filled the reckoning deck when the broadside had scorched the paint. The silence of a certainty meeting the fact that unmakes it, and not yet knowing how to go on being a certainty. "You cannot know that," Tesk said, but the hardness had gone thin in his voice. "You cannot know 40,000 fails. Your own model returns an error. An error is not a defeat. It is only the absence of an answer. The absence of an answer is the answer, Marshal." It was Corvith who spoke, from the side of the hall where the survivors stood, and the old High Marshal came forward slowly into the center of the chamber, and the hall turned to him, because whatever it thought of a reckoner's failed science, no one in the compact would call High Marshal Corvith a coward or a liar, and the humans had known that too, and had chosen him for exactly this moment 11 days and 100,000 kilometers away. "I have flown the Crescent 100 times. I flew it into the Wedden Deep. I watched a single hull take a full battle line's broadside and wear it as a scratch. I watched a proud man of an old family throw 3,000 meters of steel against its flank at ramming speed, and I watched the ship decline to fire on him, because it did not consider his death worth a single gun. I gave the order to send our whole line down its throat in one column, and I watched it open every gun it owned and erase 230 hulls in 11 seconds. He let the number sit in the old hall, and then, Marshal Tesk, it stopped. With 32 of us left, helpless in a shoal it owned, it stopped firing, and it let me choose 10 hulls to live, and it spared my flagship on purpose, so that I would stand where I am standing now and tell you what I am telling you. It did not spare me because it was tired, or damaged, or merciful. It spared me because it wanted the message carried by the one witness this hall could not dismiss. I am that witness. Dismiss me, and you have decided that the humans understood the compact better than the compact understands itself, and you will prove it by flying the crescent again and filling a larger shoal with a larger fleet. Then what would you have us do? Said the first Archon, and for the first time the cold old voice had something in it that was not certainty. Kneel. Shall the Sethlin compact that has folded 900 peoples learn to kneel because one people built one ship? No, Corvith said. The humans did not ask us to kneel. Understand that, First Archon, because it is the strangest part and the most important. A conqueror wants you to kneel. The humans did not want the Wedden Deep, and they do not want the compact, and they did not ask for our surrender or our tribute or our worship. They asked for one thing. They asked us to leave the Calderfolk alone, and to stop flying the crescent at the peoples they have chosen to stand behind. That is all. They built a 38-kilometer ship and killed 400 hulls to deliver a request that costs us nothing to grant, because it asks us only to stop taking things that were never ours. They are not asking us to kneel, First Archon. They are telling us the crescent has met the one people it does not work on, and inviting us, once, to notice that before we spend the whole compact learning it the way I learned it. The first Archon did not answer at once. Vessen watched the old cold male look at the western wall, at the arrow yielding his own family had inscribed 3 centuries before, at the 900 names that were the whole argument of the compact's long life, and he watched the thing that the perjurants had wanted to happen begin, at last, to happen in the one place it needed to happen, which was not the Wedden Deep, and not the High Hall, but behind the eyes of the male who ruled it. Leave the hall, Osric said finally, all but the reckoners and the marshals of the line. The compact will consider the Wedden Deep, and it will consider it fully, and it will not be rushed to its answer by fear or by pride, for it has been rushed by both tonight, and I trust neither. He looked at Corvith. High Marshal, you will remain, and you, Reckoner Vessen. The compact will need its arithmetic before it is done, and I find to my displeasure that I believe yours. They considered the Wedden Deep for 31 days. Vessen was in the hall for all of them, and he gave the compact its arithmetic 100 times over, every fleet size the marshals could imagine, every trick and stratagem and desperate cleverness, and every one of them returned the same error against the same ship. And slowly, across the 31 days, the marshals of the line stopped arguing with the error and began to understand it, the way Vessen had understood it in the deep, not as a gap in the science, but as the edge of what the science was about. You could not compute a way to make the humans need to yield, because the humans had spent a century building the physical proof that they did not, and the proof was 38 kilometers long, and it wore 100 years of scars, and it was, at that moment, somewhere out past the Calder crossings, keeping its long, patient watch over the peoples it had chosen, waiting to see whether the compact had received the message or would need it delivered a second time. There was one marshal, in the last days of the 31, who would not let the arithmetic alone. His name was Bade, and he had lost a brother in the final column of the Wedden Deep, and grief had made him relentless in the particular way that grief makes a certain kind of mind relentless. He did not want the larger fleet out of pride, but out of the need for his brother's death to have been survivable, to have been a near thing rather than a foregone one. He came to Vessen privately, away from the hall, and he laid out a plan that had cost him a month of sleepless nights, and it was, Vessen admitted, the cleverest thing anyone had proposed. Do not fight the ship at all, Bade said. Collapse the shoal on it. Bring 100 hulls not as a fleet but as engineers. Seed the walls of the next Wedden Deep with the charges that crack fortress moons. And when the ship comes down the throat, bury it. Bring 1,000 kilometers of shoal wall down on 38 kilometers of hull, and let the mountain do what the guns cannot. Vessen took the plan to the plinth, because Bade deserved to see it computed rather than merely refused, and he ran it honestly with every advantage granted. And the plinth returned the error, and Vessen showed Bade why, and it was the last cruelty the Wedden Deep had to teach, because the reason the plan failed was the reason all of them failed. You are assuming the ship comes down the throat because it must, Vesson said. It does not come down the throat because it must. It came down the throat at the Wedden Deep because it chose to, because coming down the throat was the message. A ship that can reach both walls of a shoal without moving does not need the throat. Cede your walls, Marshal bade, and the ship will hold at the mouth and reach your 100 engineers where they work, one at a time, and your charges will bury nothing but the crews who laid them. There is no ground you can prepare that it needs to stand on. That is what 38 kilometers means. It does not have to enter the trap to spring it, because it is never the one who is trapped. Bade sat with that a long time, and then he wept once for a brother whose death had never been a near thing, and then he stood up a different man than he had come in, and he was one of the marshals who, in the years after, saw to it that the crescent stayed cold. The compact received it. It did not kneel, because it had not been asked to. It did not send the larger fleet, because the arithmetic would not let the marshals pretend a larger fleet was anything but a larger grave. What it did was quieter and, Vesson thought, far stranger, and it was the thing the humans had been building toward when they let 400 hulls into a shoal to kill all but 11. The compact retired the crescent. Not with a decree, the compact did not decree its own defeats, but in the way a people quietly stops doing a thing it has understood will kill it. The crescent simply ceased to be flown. The doctrine that had grown the compact for 6,000 years, that had folded in 900 peoples, that had been the surest habit the Sethlin owned, went cold in the fleet's hands, because every marshal who might have flown it now carried in the back of his mind a 38-kilometer shape at the mouth of a shoal, and the flat, unhurried voice of a young human saying, "Do not make us teach it twice." And Vesson was given the task he had known, since the third day of the flight home would fall to him. The first Archon summoned him to the western wall, to the 900 yieldings, and told him to inscribe the Wedden Deep. "You will write the humans into the record," Osric said. "The Hall has decided. 6,000 years of reckoning does not pretend a thing did not happen because the thing was terrible. Write them down, Reckoner. Give them their entry among the peoples the compact has met." So Vesson took the old tools, the inscribing tools that reckoners had used to cut the 900 yieldings into the stone, and he stood before the place at the end of the wall where the next entry would go, and he found that he did not know how to make it. Every entry on the wall had the same shape, the name of the people, the size of the fleet the crescent had shown them, the time to yielding, the percentile, the terms of their folding in, 900 entries, and every one of them the record of a surrender point found and pressed. He raised the tool to the stone to begin the human entry in the same shape, and he could not, because the human entry had no time to yielding, and no percentile, and no terms of folding in, because the humans had not yielded, and had not been folded, and had not been shown a surrender point because they did not have one. He stood before the stone for a long time, and then he understood what the entry had to be, and he cut it. He cut the name of the humans and the date of the Wedden Deep, and the fleet the crescent had shown them, 410 hulls, and the number that had returned out of the shoal, 11. And where every other entry on the wall gave the time to yielding and the percentile of compliance and the terms, Vesson cut, in the old script, in the deep clean strokes the reckoners had used for 6,000 years, a single line, and then he left the rest of the entry blank, because the blankness was the truest thing he could carve. The line said, "This people has no surrender point, the wall ends here." The years that followed were quiet, and the quiet was itself the strangest testimony to what had happened in the Wedden Deep, because the Sethlin Compact had not known a quiet like it in 6,000 years. The crescent stayed cold. The frontier fleets that had once gone out to find small peoples and show them the arithmetic of their smallness stayed in their berths, or went out only to patrol, and the peoples at the edges of compact space who had spent 100 generations waiting for the crescent to appear over their worlds noticed slowly that it had stopped coming, and did not understand why. And Vesson thought that this was right, that they should not have to understand why, that it was enough for them simply to be left alone. He grew old at the Western Wall. The first Archon made him keeper of the ledger in his last years of service, and the office meant that the young reckoners came to him to learn the science, and he taught them the 900 yieldings, the curves and the thresholds and the percentiles, because the science was still true and still useful, and a people must know its own history. And then, at the end of every teaching, he brought them to the blank entry at the end of the wall, to the human entry with its single cut line and its deliberate emptiness, and he made them stand before it, and he told them what it meant. The science works, he told them every time. That is the thing you must never forget, and the thing that will most tempt you to forget it. 900 times the ledger was right. It will be right the 901st time, and the 1000th on every people that has a surrender point, which is very nearly all of them. It will make you feel that force and yielding are the whole of the world, because for very nearly the whole of the world they are. He would gesture at the blank stone. And then one day the model will return an error, and you will be tempted to think the error is a flaw in the model, a thing to be patched, a gap to be filled with a larger fleet. It is not. The error is the model telling you that you have reached the edge of the kind of thing it is about. There are peoples in the reach of space who have stepped outside the question of yielding entirely, who have looked at the whole logic of surrender and built the physical fact that makes it inapplicable to them. And when you meet one, the ledger will not fail you by giving you a wrong number. It will do you the last kindness it can. It will give you no number at all, and it will mean run. They did not always believe him, the young reckoners, and that too was right, because he had not believed it himself until he watched a 90-gun broadside scorch the paint on a hull that came on without slowing. Belief of that kind is not taught. It is survived. He only hoped, when he sent them out to the frontier fleets with the science in their hands, that if the error ever returned to them out of some far shoal, they would remember the old keeper standing before the blank stone, and would read the error correctly, and would live. Once in his last years, the message was very nearly forgotten, and had to be delivered again, and Wesen was there for the delivering, and it was the last time in his life that he saw the shape. A frontier marshal named Orden, young and ambitious and born in the quiet years after the Wedden Deep, had never seen the crescent fail because he had never seen the crescent flown. And to a certain kind of young mind, a defeat that happened before you were born is not quite real, is only a story the old men tell to explain their own caution. Orden had a fleet and a border and a grievance. The shoal folk of the Calder crossings, grown bold in the long quiet, had closed a trade lane that ran through their space, and Orden proposed to open it the old way, the sure way, the way that had grown the compact for 6,000 years. He formed a crescent at the edge of the Calder crossings, 200 hulls, and he showed it to the shoal folk, and he opened a channel and gave them the terms, and he waited for the yielding that his whole young life had told him was the natural order of the smaller thing before the larger. Wesen heard of it because the first Archon, a new first Archon now, Osric long dead, but the office had learned its caution and kept it, summoned the old keeper to the high hall the moment the report of Orden's crescent arrived, and asked him a single question. Reckoner, the shoal folk of the Calder crossings, in your judgment, are they still under the humans' watch? I do not know if the humans still watch them, First Archon, Wesen said. I know that 40 years ago the humans killed 400 hulls to make the point that they did, and I know that a people who will do that once does not usually stop watching. I would not test it. I would recall Marshal Orden before the shoal folk finish sending whatever they are, at this moment, sending out past the crossings. The first Archon recalled Marshal Orden. The order went out at the fastest band the compact owned, and it was, Wesen would learn afterward, 4 hours too slow, because the shoal folk of the Calder crossings had already finished sending their message the moment Orden's crescent formed, exactly as another people had sent theirs into the Wedden Deep 40 years before, and the answer to it was already coming. Marshal Orden's own reckoner was a young male named Sethen, one of Vesen's, one of the students who had stood before the blank stone, and heard the old keeper say that when the model returns an error it means run. Vesen would hear the whole of it from Sethen afterward, in the high hall, from a young reckoner who had lived through the thing his teacher had only described, and who understood at last that it had never been a story the old men told to explain their caution. It came out of the deep dark past the Calder crossings, Sethen said, prow first, and the frontier fleet's optics could not hold it at first because the mind refused the scale, and Sethen had run the return 4 times before he carried it to Orden, because he could not believe it, and because he had been taught before he believed anything to check the number and check it again. The return did not change. It said the contact was 38 kilometers long. It said the contact was under power and closing, and it had not answered any hail because it had not slowed to talk. And Sethen, who had never seen the Wedden Deep, who had been born into the long quiet, felt the whole of his teacher's warning arrive in him at once, and he went to Marshal Orden, and he said the thing that Vesen had spent his last years hoping some student of his would one day have the sense to say. Marshal, Sethen said, the model returns an error. Recall the crescent, we have to leave. Orden did not want to leave. He was young, and the crescent was formed, and the shoal folk were beneath his guns, and the thing coming out of the dark was one hull, however large, against 200 of the line. He gave the order that every young commander gives, the order Corvith had given in the deep out of 100 flights of confidence: hold, and range the contact, and show it the crescent's teeth. And the fleet ranged the contact, 200 hulls, and the contact came on at the same unbroken speed it had held since the dark 38 kilometers of weathered gray hull with 10,000 small lights burning along its flanks. And it did not slow, and it did not raise a shield that Sethen's instruments could find, and it did not answer, because it had not come to answer. Then the human captain spoke, a different voice than the one Vesen had heard in the Wedden Deep, older or younger. Sethen could not tell, but the same flat, unhurried calm, the same quality of a people for whom this was not passion but task. And it said, across every compact channel at once, only this: Compact fleet, this is the perjurance. You are showing the crescent to a people under our watch. You have seen this ship's answer to that once already, 40 years ago in the Wedden Deep. 410 hulls entered, 11 left. I am not going to say it again, and I am not going to wait very long. Recall your crescent, or become the second entry in a record I would rather keep short. And Marshal Orden, young, ambitious, born into the quiet, holding 200 hulls of the line against one ship, did the thing that the whole of the Wedden Deep had been fought to make possible. He believed it, not because the ship threatened him. It had barely threatened him at all. He believed it because his reckoner had stood before a blank stone as a student and been taught to read the error, and because somewhere in the back of even an ambitious young mind there was a 38-kilometer shape and a number carved into the western wall, 410 in, 11 out, and a single cut line beneath it that said the wall ends here. Orden recalled the crescent. 200 hulls stood down and turned from the Calder crossings and went home, and not one of them was fired upon, and the perjurance held its position past the crossings until they were gone, and then it, too, turned, back into the deep dark it had come out of, back to its long patient watch, and the shoal folk of the Calder crossings were left alone, which was the only thing anyone had ever asked. Sethen brought the report to the High Hall himself, and when he had given it, he came to find the old keeper of the ledger, and the 2 reckoners stood together before the western wall, before the blank entry that Vesen had cut 40 years before, the young one who had just survived the thing and the old one who had first understood it. You were right, Sethen said, about the error, about what it means. I read it and I knew, before I understood how I knew, that the number was not missing. It was warning me. He looked at the blank stone. The whole fleet is alive because of one line you carved into a wall 40 years ago. The whole fleet is alive, Vesen said, because a people at the edge of the Calder crossings decided, a century before either of us was born, that the Crescent would get exactly one answer from them, and then built the answer 38 kilometers long and kept it out of our sight until we needed to be taught. I only wrote down what they taught us. The wall does not save anyone, Sethan. It only remembers. The saving was done in the Wedden Deep, by 400 hulls that did not come home, and by the ship that made sure 11 did. Vesson died in the second year after the Calder crossings, old even for a reckoner, and in the last season of his life, he was often found before the western wall, in the long hours when the high hall was empty, and the young reckoners who kept an eye on him said that he was not studying the 900 yieldings that had been the work of his life. He was standing before the blank entry at the end, before the humans, before the single-cut line and the deliberate emptiness beneath it. And he was doing the thing he had done on the first night in the Wedden Deep, and every night after, which was trying, one last time, to make his science say something true about the thing that had ended it. He never could. That was the peace he came to in the end, and he tried to give it to the students who sat with him. The science could not say the true thing about the humans, because the true thing was not a thing the science was built to hold. His whole life he had believed that force sought surrender, that the purpose of overwhelming power was to find the point where the smaller thing broke and to press it, that this was simply the shape of the world, as fixed and cold as the mathematics that described it. He had believed it because for very nearly the whole of the world it was true, and because he had spent 40 years watching it be true 900 times over, and because a certainty that large does not feel like a belief from the inside. It feels like sight. And then a people had shown him that it was not sight. It was a wall, and the wall had an edge, and past the edge there were peoples who did not fit inside the shape of it at all. The humans had not been stronger than the 900. Vesson had come to understand that this was the part the young ones always missed, the part that had taken him his whole life to hold. The humans were not a larger fleet or a harder people or a fiercer will. They were a different kind of thing than the Crescent was built to answer, and the difference was not in their weapons. It was in a decision, made in some room the Compact had never seen and never would, a long time before the Wedden Deep. The decision that the Crescent would get one answer from them, and that the answer would be the kind that ends the record instead of joining it. Everything else, the 38 kilometers, the 10,000 guns, the 100 years of scars, the long patient watch out past the Calder crossings, was only the making physical of that one decision, the building of a fact large enough that no fleet in the reach of space could argue with it. They had never wanted the Compact to kneel. Vesson held that at the last as the strangest and truest thing he knew about them. A conqueror wants you to kneel, because a conqueror needs the kneeling. It is the whole of what he came for, the surrender that makes him larger. The humans had come to the Wedden Deep with a ship that could have unmade the Compact entire, and they had asked for nothing but to be left to leave other peoples alone. They had spared the most credible witness the Compact owned, on purpose, so that the message would land whole. They had let 200 hulls turn from the Calder crossings and go home unfired upon, because the point had never been the killing. The point had been that the Crescent had met the one people it did not work on, and that this was a fact the Compact would be wiser to notice than to test. They had built the largest warship that had ever moved through space, and they had used it, across 40 years, almost entirely to make other people's fleets go home. That was the category error, and Vesson understood in his last season that he had been looking at it from the wrong side the whole time. He had thought the error was the ship, that a minor people had produced an object their catalogued strength said they could not, but the ship was only the visible part. The real error, the one that had walked 400 hulls into a shoal, was in the Compact's own certainty, in the beautiful false wall of 900 yieldings, in 6,000 years of believing that everything that could be shown the Crescent would break before it. The humans had not defeated a fleet. They had defeated a way of seeing the world, and they had done it so completely that the Compact had quietly stopped seeing the world that way at all, and the frontier peoples slept easier for it and never knew why. And that, Vesson thought, was the most human thing about the whole of it, that the largest warship ever built had been spent not on an empire, but on a quiet. He asked near the end to be brought to the wall a final time, and the young reckoners brought him, and he stood before the blank entry that he had cut 40 years before, and he read the single line one last time. This people has no surrender point. The wall ends here. And he thought of the first night, of the 9 minutes he had waited for a surrender that was never coming, of the young voice that had not carried the sound of a throat about to bare itself, of the picket officer's cracking voice saying 38 kilometers, of the broadside that scorched the paint, and he understood that he had been present, alone among the reckoners of 6,000 years, at the single moment the wall reached its edge, and that this was either the great misfortune of his life or its one meaning, and that he had never been able to decide which, and that he no longer needed to. Somewhere out past the Calder crossings, in the deep dark the compact no longer flew its crescents into, the ship was still keeping its watch. It would outlast him. It had been built to outlast everything applied to it, and its name meant exactly that, and the peoples it had chosen to stand behind would go on being left alone long after the last man who had seen it in the wedding deep was dust, because the compact remembered now, in the deep place beneath its doctrine where a people keeps the lessons it paid for in hulls. 410 in, 11 out, a wall that ended in a single line. And a thing 38 kilometers long, weathered and patient and awake in every meter of its length, holding the dark at the edge of a small people's sky, waiting, without heat and without hurry, for the next fleet foolish enough to mistake the quiet for surrender. They never came again. That was the message, and it had been carried and it held. The largest warship humanity ever built had said its one sentence to the galaxy, and the galaxy at last had learned to read it. There are peoples you do not show the crescent, because they have no surrender in them, and they will cross the whole dark to teach you so, and then they will let you live, so that you remember.